a Lego version of a church. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the Lego principle in just a little bit, but I wanted to stick that into your brain. So I want to start by reading just a couple of verses of Scripture to you. The first of which is Ephesians 2:19 to 22. So then you are no longer strangers and aliens, but you are fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God, built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Christ Jesus himself being the cornerstone, in whom the whole structure, being joined together, that's key, being joined together, grows into a holy temple in the Lord. In him you also are being built together into a dwelling place for God by the Spirit. So we are built together. We are joined together if you are in Christ. And then 1 Peter 2:5 also has the same idea. You yourselves, like living stones, are being built together and as a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. So in Jesus, we are being built together. God is taking us and knitting us and forming us together. You can sort of make the leap to how that has to do with Legos. I mean, in the same way that there was a temple in the first century that they went to and they worshiped, God uses us, people, to be his temple today, and he is knitting us together. He is forming us together. We are literally like the stones that he uses to build his house, and so we all come together for that. So I want to do a quick little review of these 4 sessions that we have now covered. This will be the 4th and final session for A Passion for Teaching, which is geared for new teacher training, but this is definitely applicable to everybody. So the first session was the pledge to teach. That basically it is a commitment. It is a commitment to teach. We have to be committed to a higher standard. Session 2 is the perfecting of the teacher. That if you want to have a successful class, you got to work on yourself. That if you draw closer to God, your class will draw closer to God. And then session 3, the philosophy of teaching. We talked about this last week. That really it's about your students. That how do you teach? What do you teach? Well, we teach the Bible, but we teach the Bible to people. So it's all about the students. And then this week, session 4, the principles in teaching. These will be the basics. This is supposed to wrap it up. If you want to go back and review, and you don't want to watch the other 3 50-minute teachings, you can just watch this one, and it'll summarize it all up. It'll give us all. But what we're going to be focusing on is really kind of that Lego principle and how we're built together. So we're going to talk about leadership. Leadership is incredibly important. Everything rises and falls on leadership. I've heard that said. John Maxwell says that leadership is influence. Nothing more, nothing less. And I think that's really true. And I think you're right to hone in on the fact that you lead people, but you manage things. And as the teacher naturally takes on this role. The teacher naturally absorbs the leadership role in the class. And you can think of people like Moses and the Old Testament prophets and, Jesus himself. I mean, not that we are Jesus, but Jesus, Peter, Paul, all these men took on a leadership role because they were the teachers. And that's just sort of just naturally what happens. People look at you. And so the teacher, leader, must know his purpose. And our purpose is to reach people, teach people, and minister to people or love people, as we have said, which is a synonym for ministry. And I just want to reiterate this verse. This is one that we used on Sunday morning in our introduction to Sunday school class every week. And this is one that we looked at before. And repetition is one of those, if you remember from some of the lesson before, repetition is important. But here it is again, Matthew 4:23. And Jesus went throughout all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom, and healing every disease and every affliction among the people. So this is what we want to do. We want to balance this out. And we want to be about reaching people, teaching people, and loving people, or what you could also call ministry. So if the teacher leader is not sure, then nobody's sure. So what's the purpose of our class? You would get to the point, if you remember in the book of Judges, there was a time where there was no one leading Israel. They didn't have a king. They didn't have anyone leading. And what was the statement? Everybody did what was right in their own eyes. And for you as well, a Sunday school class can take on a lot of identities, or it can fill a lot of functions in people's lives. They might want to get together and, I don't know, quilt. They might want to get together and talk about fishing, or they might want to get together and talk about sports, or they might want to get together and do something. And all those kind of things, fellowship type things, could be good things. But we do have a purpose. We've got a reason why we get together, and that's to reach people, teach people, and minister to people. So it's up to you, it's up to me to keep that our purpose and make sure that's what we're doing in our class each week. And so we design that structure to make sure that takes place. But anyway, in continuing to talk about leadership here, number 2, the teacher leader must fill 3 roles to align himself with the 3 tasks of Sunday school. And really, your class needs you as the teacher to personally fulfill these 3 tasks. They need to realize that these are a vital part of not only Sunday school but of life. And so, just as we talked about the fact in the perfecting of the teacher, that if you want your class to be well-rounded and exemplify these things, you've got to exemplify them yourself. And what I have found too is that it's not something that you can just talk about. It's got to be something that you actually do. If you want your class to do these things, you got to do them yourself, and that's how you get buy-in. That's how that will build credibility for you. So the first task we know, that's to reach people. The teacher leader must fill the role of leader. And as the leader, this is probably going to be the hardest thing to integrate into your class, reaching people. Sharing the gospel with people somehow, finding ways in order to invite people to church, finding ways to reach out to those outside the walls. This is going to be the thing you have to be the most intentional about, because honestly, you studied your lesson, you've got your Bible, teaching the Bible, that is almost automatic in your class. People are going to show up. They're going to start talking about, I've got this problem, I've got this sickness, or my family member's hurt with this, You're going to pray for each other. That's probably the second easiest thing. And the hardest thing of the 3 things is keeping this before your class. And so you've got to be committed in your mind to say, all right, we're going to spend whatever the amount of time it is, 10 minutes or whatever, in each class, and be focused somehow on outreach. So you've got to do that. That's that role of leadership. You got to take the people where they might not naturally go. But you know what? I think most people, especially in church, if you were to ask the question, are we supposed to invite people to church? Well, everybody would say, sure. It's just a matter of putting that before them. So task number 2, teaching people. The teacher leader must fill the role of teacher. That's almost self-explanatory. No one else is going to do it. It's going to be you. Now, there's going to be times where you can't be there, and we'll talk about that in just a minute, but that's going to be your role primarily as the teacher. It's right there in the title. The teacher teaches. That's what they're about. But then task 3, to love people. The teacher leader must fill the role of shepherd. Now, this may not be your initial giftedness. It may, but it may not be. Like for me, I don't have the gift of mercy. I don't think about these kind of things. But even still, in any Sunday school class that I'm leading, I've got to make sure, if it's not me, somebody leads the prayer time. Somebody makes sure that if something's going on in someone's life, there's a mechanism by which we'll know about it. They would have given a prayer request. We would get together and think about, hey, how can we minister to these folks? Do we need to bring them meals? Do we need to go mow their yard? Whatever. We would be there to care for them. That's everything that a Sunday school class, honestly, to put it this way, all those 3 tasks of Sunday school, anything that a class would want to do, the buck stops with the teacher. You're the final backstop. But you also don't have to be in it all on your own. So number 3, the teacher leader must empower others with the 3 tasks of Sunday school. So you empower others. Ultimately, you're the buck stops with you, but it needs to not start with you, because part of our strategy is to get more people involved. But we'll talk about that in just a second. So task 1 that we talked about, to reach people. The teacher leader must enlist an outreach leader. And this is the thing, and you'll find yourself getting frustrated with this, even if it's something you believe in. So task 2, teach people. Obviously, we want to do this. That's your job as the teacher. But the teacher leader must also enlist an assistant teacher. Now here again, same kind of thing. When you've only got a couple of people in your class, this isn't as an emergency, but as you go along, you want to enlist this person, an assistant teacher, so that this person about once a month can fill in and teach for you. Now you may even have a class. I know some classes already have a rotation, that they do, which is good. But this is how eventually a class. I know if you're just starting a brand new class, you're thinking, start a new class. How can I think about that? and what we're going to do is say that we want to lead each class to start a new class about every 2 years. Well, 2 years is a long time. I mean, you can do a lot in 2 years' time. But where is that teacher going to come from? Well, somebody who would fill in about once a month. That gives you a break every once in a while. You can read ahead. You can think about things. 4 to 6 weeks, whatever. And I would encourage you to do that when you're going to be out of town or those kind of things. But also when you just stay there. Be there and just to be an encouragement to them and just kind of sit in your class too. It's kind of fun, actually. And then task 3, love people. The teacher leader must enlist care group leaders. Again, if your class is less than 10 people in it, then it's just one care group. But as your class grows and gets bigger, you're going to want to subdivide those into groups of 10 to 12 people, 10 to 12 people on the roll. Each ministry objective must be owned by a ministry leader. That means you as the teacher, you own the teaching. If your class is going to have good teaching, it's up to you. You have a ministry leader who's over outreach. They own it. They say, we're going to be an outreach-oriented class. It's up to them. If it's going to be, they say, that's my baby. That's what I do. And you've got someone to say also, and this is really important, to say no one's going to fall through the cracks. If somebody visits our class, we're going to bug them until they say, leave us alone, or they become a part of our class. Somebody owns that. And those 3 tasks, of course, every Christian is supposed to be doing all of those 3 things. I mean, ultimately, I get those 3 tasks from the Great Commission. That's what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be sharing the gospel and reaching people. We're supposed to be teaching people, making disciples. And what are we supposed to teach? Well, Jesus said the greatest commandment is to love God and love your neighbor. So obviously we're supposed to be doing those 3 things, all reaching, teaching, and loving. But it's hard to keep all those in balance. And so if you just focus on one in your class, and there's one leader who owns that in your class, then it's not a matter of anyone having to balance it. It's just people focusing on their one thing. And really together, that's really the key of why we want to have multiple leadership in our classes, because that'll help us. The teacher leader must know his strategy. And in talking of this strategy, that is those 3 purposes of Sunday school, but it's also this. As a ministry, in your class, it's to reach people, teach people, and minister to people. But our strategy as a church is to develop new leaders and to birth new classes. That's why we want you to enlist leaders for each of these areas. And actually, we'll ask each of these leaders to have an apprentice. For them to say, hey, are you the care group leader? Great. When you're out of town, who's going to do that for you? And someone to step in. Just as you as the teacher will have an apprentice teacher. And that's a way in which we have on-the-job training so that people can be developed. You can hear them teach. They get comfortable with teaching. And then we can birth or start new classes. New classes can start out of yours. I want to read a scripture here. It's, I won't read the whole thing, but I've got an excerpt here. If you look sometime at 2 Kings 4, the first 7 verses or so, it's the story of Elisha. Elisha was sort of the prophet in training under Elijah. You maybe remember some of those stories. And there was a wife of one of the sons of the prophets, is the way it's stated. And she was basically very poor. She had no money, just like many times is the case today. Sometimes people in ministry don't have good retirement plans. Actually, our retirement benefits are great, but it's on the other side of glory. Here, sometimes, I'll just pull back the curtain a little bit. Sort of the way that it is for most ministers is the way it is here, is we're sort of self-employed. Like when it has to do with taxes and stuff like that, we're self-employed. So we have to estimate our taxes and pay them 4 times a year, and we get to pay twice the Social Security, which is great. You know, we pay the business side and the personal side, but we have some other things that kind of help us with all that stuff. But it's sort of up to us on our own. If we're going to have a retirement plan, we have to plan on our own. I think there's a way there is sort of a loophole technicality. You can opt out of Social Security, which I didn't do. I do pay into Social Security. But then, again, I think, not that I want to get too political, but I'm not really expecting it to be there 30 years from now anyway, so who knows about all that. But anyway, this is what's going on here. One of the prophets in Israel, his son had died and left a widow. And his widow basically had nothing. All they had was a little bit, or they had these oil jars and a little bit of oil. And basically, in the ancient world, oil was a commodity. I mean, it was something you could buy and sell, but I mean, it was something that you ate, but it was something of great value. And everybody had to have it. I mean, that's how you made bread and everything else. And so she had just a little bit, and basically she said, I've got this little bit of oil. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to make our final bit of bread. We'll eat it, and then we're going to die. And Elisha comes by, and she says, help us. Help us, man of God. And if you look in verse 6, what basically happens is Elisha says, all right, you go around to all of your neighbors, and you get all the jars that you can. And these are jars that you might hold food in and keep oil and that kind of stuff. And so she sends her son out, and he goes, and this would be, I guess, the grandson of the prophet. And so he goes out and he collects all these jars and brings them in, and all these empty jars are sitting there. And so he goes, okay, let's start pouring. And so she starts pouring, and as soon as she starts pouring, it fills up a jar. And as soon as that jar gets close to being filled, she says, oh, get the next jar. She puts the next jar underneath it. She keeps pouring. And in verse 6 of 2 Kings 4, it says, when the vessels were full, she said to her son, bring me another vessel. And he said to her, there is not another. Then the oil stopped flowing. It didn't stop, and then all the jars were filled. All the jars were filled, and then the oil stopped flowing. Now, do you think, in the way that's written here, this leads me to believe that if they had had one more jar of oil, would God have provided one more jar's worth of oil? Yes. I mean, he filled up all the jars that were there. Every one that they went and got, they filled up. In other words, the amount of faith that they had to say, okay, I'm going to go get, it doesn't say how many they had, but okay, I'm going to go get 10 jars. Well, he gave them 10 jars worth. If they got 11 jars, he would have given them 11 jars worth. And I think that this principle, and you can stretch this a little too far, many times oil equals the Holy Spirit, and how does he fill us, and that kind of stuff. I guess you can make those kind of applications. But really, what I would simply want to say is that whenever God fills something, whenever God does a work, many times he only restrains himself by what our faith is. And so for us, we want to grow as a church. We want to have a place for everybody. And so what we literally do in Sunday schools, we always want to have open jars. Maybe not empty jars, but we want to have open jars. And that's what we do when we create new classes. We create space. We create places for God to fill. And, whenever, I think we read it last week, whenever Peter makes the statement, that synoptic pivot, where everything else, from that point on, Jesus turned his face to Jerusalem, and Jesus asked, who do people say that I am? Peter says, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus says, you've answered wisely, and blessed are you because God revealed this to you. and upon this rock I'll build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Well, it's God who builds his church. All that we're doing is providing a structure for him to fill it. Our structures, our classes, what this does is our strategy, it puts intentionality to your good intentions. Everybody, well, most everybody, if you'd say, do you want to be a part of a growing church? Sure. I mean, who doesn't want to be a part of a growing church? Okay, so how do we do that? This is intentionally how we do that. And so number 5, the teacher leader must know how to maximize the Sunday morning time. And in order to do that, each ministry objective must be owned by a person, but each ministry objective must also be aired. That means it needs some airtime. It needs to have time. And if you schedule time for that every Sunday morning, that will be the best way to do it. So that you don't have to say, oh, we haven't done this in a few weeks, let's do this, or oh, we haven't done this in a few weeks, let's do this. But every week, if you're disciplined to do it, then it'll get done. And we actually covered this in the first session, but this is review. And so you've really got, and these are the 3 hours that we have, and ideally you would have 75 minutes in each of these 3 hours. Most of you, actually I think all of you, but most of the new classes were starting at the 10:55 hour. So you've really got till about 10 after noon. You can go from 10:55 to about 10 after noon. And don't be too mad at the person before you if they don't get out before 10:45. Because that gives 10 minutes to go in between services and that kind of stuff, get in and get out. That's not a lot of time. But we're crunched for time. With all the stuff we want to do and all the stuff we want to cram in, that's not a lot. So you've got from 8:05 to 9:20, from 9:30 to 10:55, and then or 10:45, and then 10:55 to 12:10. The first thing you want to do is to have a fellowship time of 10 minutes. This would be having donuts, eating casserole, what'd you do this weekend, that kind of stuff. This can be a good time for you too as the teacher, just to kind of hang out, get to know what's going on in people's lives, that kind of stuff. The second thing you want to do is an announcement time. Take it about 5 minutes, open up the worship guide. Hey, here's what's going on in the church, any upcoming activities you've got, that kind of stuff. Take 5 minutes to do that. So that's 15 minutes into the 75 minutes that you have. And then you've got an hour left. And in that final hour, you want to have an outreach emphasis of 10 minutes. And that outreach person can do whatever they do during that time. They can, we talked earlier, you can go back and review and see some of the ideas that we had, or come up with your own ideas. Something to reach out of the class itself, 10 minutes. And then fourth, you want to have care group time. This would give you plenty of time. Now you can take roll and see, hey, who's here, who's not here. If they're not here, how are we going to contact them? Who's going to send them a postcard? Who's going to give them a call? Who's going to stop by and talk with them? And do we want to send postcards to people about upcoming events and that kind of stuff? Then pray for each other and pray for prayer requests. And then the last thing you can do, and this is good, it's good to have it last, because then you've got control as the teacher. You've got control of when that class ends, and it'll be the last thing that people remember. It's the last thing that they do, have that Bible study time. Half hour is not a lot of time. But it can be done. And that's the ideal. And something I've always said too is I don't think any class actually follows that schedule. They try to. Several classes try to. Sometimes the Bible study creeps up to 35 minutes, 40 minutes. Maybe you only take 10 minutes for care group time. But this is a pretty good emphasis of what we can do on Sunday mornings. It's a good ideal to shoot for anyway. Especially if you spread it out and you get other leaders, they'll want their time, which is a good thing to do. Then you can all sort of fight for it, and it becomes something you won't forget. So number 6, the teacher leader must walk with God. You can't lead by proxy, and this was our main emphasis of the perfecting of the teacher. You must walk with God. You can't lead by proxy. You're going to have good weeks and you're going to have bad weeks. You're going to have weeks where something hard happens. Use that as an opportunity to realize that the people in your class are going to have hard things happen to them too. So evangelism. This is really important. Your class must have passion for souls. The reality is this. What is the most important priority of Sunday school? The most important thing? It's all important, but I would say outreach and evangelism, this is the most important thing. And this is why I would say this. People can study the Bible and they can be loved all day long, but if they are not saved, what's going to happen? When they die, and as has been said many times, the statistics are still hovering right around 100%. We're all going to die someday, or Jesus is going to return. And I'll leave it to each of your classes to decide which which of those you think is going to happen first. And it may depend on which class you're in. But in reality, I mean, this is true. If somebody dies apart from a relationship with Jesus Christ, they will spend an eternity separated from God. And hell is a reality. I mean, it is a real thing. It is a real punishment that is just as eternal as heaven. And in light of that, though we definitely want to teach God's word, but that will lead to people coming to know Christ. We want to love people, but that will lead to people coming to know Christ. And so if we don't do anything else, we want to do evangelism. Actually, chapter 2 in that book that I gave you by Alan Taylor, The 6 Core Values of Sunday School, chapter 2 focuses on this. Why evangelism is the most important thing we do. It shouldn't be the only thing that we do, but it should be, if everything else falls apart. If you share the gospel, that's good. Like, say something just blew up and you didn't have time to study your lesson, you don't know whatever, at least share the gospel somehow, and that'll be okay. So number 2, and under evangelism, we must be intentional about this good intention. Good intentions, as they say, pave the way to where. And the reality is just like I said, everyone will say, oh, I want to be a part of a growing church. I want to be a part of a growing church. Well, a growing church is one that's reaching people and sharing the gospel with people. And that's exciting. And when people are coming to know faith, I mean, people are new believers and getting baptized, that's exciting. That's fun. But that doesn't just happen. That's not just a natural state of affairs. You got to make yourself do it. And so, number 3, your class will be no more evangelistic than you are. And you've got to make yourself do it. And if you do that, then your class will do that. So the next thing, atmosphere. Your class must have an acceptance of others. You've got to have an accepting atmosphere in your class. And so there's a third place principle. This is what we want to talk about, a third place principle. The first place is your home. This is the place where you're at home. This is home base. This is where you're comfortable. This is where you're yourself. The second place is your work. This is where your identity is. This is where you do what you do. Some people, that's the same place. But this is where what you do. Everybody's got this first place, which is their work or their home. They've got their second place, which is their work. And then people have a third place. They have the third place, which is where you hang out and just be you. There is a place, you remember Cheers, remember the show? Where everybody, what?
Knows your name.
Where everybody knows your name, right. Unfortunately, many times a bar or a restaurant or something, or the VFW hall or whatever becomes that place for people. But what we want to do is try to create the place where everybody knows your name as your Sunday school class. That's the goal. 3 key actions by the teacher, which is you, and the class leaders, which is the people that you recruit, to set the right atmosphere. Here's what you can do. Number 1, to speak. To speak. This is powerful. Now, this isn't talking about teaching the lesson, but to actually say hello to people. How's it going? How did you do? What did you do this week? Oh, I remember you were trying to do this. Just have conversations with people. to speak. That is important. That's the first thing, is to speak. The second key action is to smile. To smile. Nobody wants to follow a sourpuss. So smile. And then the third thing you can do is touch. Appropriately. but touch. Shake somebody's hand. Give somebody a hug. Maybe if it's the side hug, the side hug that you do in church, that's okay. But somehow, shake a hand. Let people know that you care. Sometimes that may be the only personal contact that people have all week, and it speaks volumes in nonverbal communication. People must snap on to others, or they will not return. And this is just true in church life. And of those who join the church and attend worship only, 15% are active after 5 years. So take a snapshot. 5 years from now, if somebody doesn't get involved in a Sunday school class, there's an 85% chance that they will not be active here 5 years from now. And that's no good. We want people to get here. We want people to connect. Of those who join the church and attend Sunday school and worship, it's almost flipped. Actually, it's even a little better than that. 87% are active after 5 years. And that includes people who move somewhere else with another job and they get involved in another church, and so that's fine. I mean, we're never going to be able to guard against that. I mean, people are going to move, that kind of stuff. But 87% of the people who actually get involved in a Sunday school class 5 years from now will still be involved at the church. And people can go up to other churches and that kind of stuff. But as long as they're here, we want to care for them. We want to take care of them. We don't want people to slip through the cracks. And that's where this big word assimilation comes from. So Sunday school is the church's strategy and method for assimilating new members. And the word to assimilate, it means to take in or to absorb. People's snap-on points are relationships. That's where people will get connected. It's with people. Relationships start with knowing people's names. So wear name tags. I already talked about that. So wear name tags. This is an excellent practice and one that I know not all classes do, but it really will make a difference. Development. Your class must have leaders being developed. I already said this is part of our strategy. Classes come packaged with some assembly required. And it's kind of like, if you remember, if you've ever had kids, you know what every father ends up doing. It's Christmas Eve, and you go down and there's all those presents, and you open the box and you say, okay, let's see, what do I got to do here? And the words on the box that can strike fear, other than batteries not included, is some assembly required, right? And you open up a box, especially if you got babies. Oh my gosh, if you're putting together baby furniture now, you open up the box and it's like a gajillion little pieces, and you got to put it all together. Well, a Sunday school class doesn't just happen on its own. It doesn't just come prepackaged, ready to go. There is some assembly required, and this is the development of leaders. Each class objective must be owned by someone. And we already talked about that. But when it's everyone's job, it's no one's job. And that's the reality. Those three functions of Sunday school, we want our classes to do it. But if one person doesn't take the onus of each one of those, then it's going to be no one's job. And I've got this on your notes there. And I love this story. I couldn't resist it. This is the story of everybody, somebody, anybody, and nobody. I think you mentioned this one, Heather, right? That you were reading. This is in, I think, Sunday School in HD.
Yes.
This is one of those books by Alan Taylor. But here it is. This is a story of 4 church members named everybody, somebody, anybody, and nobody. There was an important job to be done, and everybody was sure that somebody would do it. Anybody could have done it, but nobody did it. Somebody got angry about that because it was everybody's job. Everybody thought anybody could do it, but nobody realized that everybody wouldn't do it. It ended up that everybody blamed somebody when nobody did what anybody could have done. So in other words, you can always blame it on somebody else. You can always think, okay, this is something we're supposed to be doing, so someone else will take care of that. We'll talk more about that in just a second. But in terms of development, the class teacher should have another member teach the class once a month. So new teachers will be developed. This is the basic development strategy of leaders. It's on-the-job training. So if you can find somebody in the first few weeks even of your class, just kind of be thinking, the person who asks questions, the person who's most engaged, they're the natural person. The first time even maybe you got to be out of town or something, you find them and say, hey, would you mind filling in? Or even if you're going to be there, say, would you mind taking over? One of the things we want to do is be developing people, and I think you do a good job at teaching. Would you take over the class for this week? That's a great way to develop people. And then number 4, your class should birth a minimum of every 2 years. And we already talked about that. That's what we want to be going towards. I know it seems like, well, gosh, it's going to be only me as far as I know in my class. But you'll start getting people. I mean, as you pray about it, as you reach out to people, obviously, if it's only you in a class, then focus more on the evangelism part. The Bible study part you'll take care of during the week. But as more people come to your class, it'll begin to grow. And then your tendency, you'll want to say, look, we're just now getting ahead of steam. We're just now starting to be able to get things going. We're just now making friends with people. But that's the time where you really got to say, all right, as soon as we're getting comfortable, we're here now. Now we've got about 25, 30 people. It's time to start a new class. And the easiest time to start thinking about that is from day one, is to just remember that. And if you're developing the leaders and you're constantly saying, hey, within the next 18 to 24 months, we're going to try to start a new class. That's exciting. It gives you a goal. It gives you something to shoot for. It gives you something to say, this is what we're trying to do. Number 5, the secret to success is the involvement of people. The involvement of people. If you just show up and teach a Sunday school lesson, you may have a few people who will just stick and they're there forever. And there are lots of classes that are like that. And God bless them, that's great. But there's no progress. There's no reaching more. There's no growth. There's no overall big development going on. In Sunday school, it can't be a one-man band. You can keep that up for a few months, maybe 4 or 6 months, something like that, while especially your class is getting started. You might can start that going, but you're going to get tired. I mean, it'll become difficult if you're the only one doing that. So I want to read this obituary. This is an obituary, sort of along the same lines of that other routine that I read. But this is an obituary. Our church was saddened to learn this week of the death of one of our most valued members, someone else. Mr. Else had been. Someone's passing creates a vacancy that will be difficult to fill. Mr. Else had been with us for many years, and for every one of those years, someone did far more than a normal person's share of the work. Whenever there was a job to do, a class to teach, a visit to make, or a need to meet, one name was at the top of everyone's list. Let someone else do it. Whenever leadership was mentioned, this wonderful person was looked to for inspiration as well as results. Someone else can work with that group. It was common knowledge that someone else was among the most liberal givers in the church. Whenever there was a financial need, everyone just assumed someone else would make up the difference. Someone else was a wonderful person, sometimes appearing superhuman. Were the truth known, everybody expected too much of someone else. Now someone else is gone. We wonder what we are going to do. Someone else left a wonderful example, but who is going to follow it? Who is going to do the things someone else did? When you are asked to help, remember, we can't depend on someone else anymore. And the reality is that we can do more than me. We can't just rely on someone else to do the job that we know that God is calling us to do.